Today's lesson, lesson 76, multiplying radical expressions. What is a radical? A radical is a symbol that looks like this. So if I take one radical, like 3, and multiply it times another radical, like 5, then I would multiply the two numbers underneath the radical to get radical 15. If I had 3 times radical 2 times 5 times radical 3, I would multiply the numbers outside the radicand to get 15, multiply the 2 times the 3 to get 6. Pretty simple. Sometimes when we multiply radical numbers, we'll get a radicand that can be simplified. If I multiply the square root of 2 times the square root of 50, or radical 2 times radical 50, however you choose to say it is okay, I will get the square root of 100. And the square root of 100 is then equal to 10. If I have the square root 3 times the square root of 6x times the square root of 2x. Let's take a look what that is. This is 3 in the front. 3 times 1 is 3. And then I multiply the two things up underneath the square root. 6 times 2 is 12, and x times x is x squared. When I simplify this radicand, I remember the product rule and separate those two things. Because the square root of x squared is x, and then the square root of 12 simplifies to be 4 times 3, which is then 2 square root of 3. I take the whole number 2 and multiply it times the 3 to get 6. The x sits in the front with that 6, and then the square root of 3 is sitting over to the side there. So the answer would be 6x times the square root of 3. The numbers in front of the radicand multiply times each other, and the numbers underneath the radicand multiply times each other. If I have something like 5 times the square root of 2, then that's simply 5 square root of 2. I cannot multiply those two things together. Let's look at an example using the distributive property. If I have the square root of 3 sitting in front of a binomial, 8 plus the square root of 6, then I would distribute that just as I would anything else. I would say the square root of 3 times 8, which is 8 square root of 3. And the square root of 3 times the square root of 6, which is then the square root of 18. This 8 square root of 3 would stay the same, but the square root of 18 can simplify to 9 times 2, which simplifies further to 3 times the square root of 2. 8 plus the square root of 3, 8 times the square root of 3 plus 3 times the square root of 2 would be our answer. We're going to take a look at 2 more examples of multiplying with radicals. The first one is multiplying 3 plus the square root of 2 times 6 minus the square root of 5. Same thing as before when we multiplied binomials. We take the first terms and we multiply them times each other. 3 times 6 is 18. And then 3 times the square root of 5 is negative, because of the negative here, negative 3 square root 5. Then I have a positive 2 positive square root of 2 times 6, which is 6 times the square root of 2, and then square root of 2 times the square root of 5, which is negative, which multiplies to get a negative square root of 10. That does not simplify. Unfortunately, it stays exactly like that. Our next example, and our last example, is 4 minus the square root of 8 to the second power. Here you have a choice of either factoring it out like this, remembering that it's a binomial because of this 2 here, or you can remember the rule that says I take the first one and I square it to get 16. I multiply those 2 times each other and then multiply that times 2. 4 times the square root of 8 times 2 is negative 8 times the square root of 8. Negative square root of 8 times the negative square root of 8 is a positive square root of 64. The square root of 64 is 8. The square root of 8 can be simplified. Negative 8 times 4 times 2, and the 16 is in the front. Continuing to simplify, 16 minus 8 times 2 times the square root of 2 plus 8. I'll put this up here so you can see it good as we finish this problem. So here I have 16 minus 8 times 2 times the square root of 2 plus 8. Making sure I multiply those two things first. 16 minus 16 times the square root of 2 plus 8. I then combine the 16 and the 8, to get 24. This is a positive 16. So those combine to get a positive 24. So my final answer would be 24 minus 16 times the square root of 2. The other way that you could have done that, if you did not remember that shortcut way, is to multiply the binomial 4 minus the square root of 8 times 4 minus the square root of 8. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative square root of 8 is negative 4 square root of 8. Negative square root of 8 times 4 again is negative 4 square root of 8. Negative square root of 8 times negative square root of 8 is positive square root of 64. Combining like terms, I get negative 8 times the square root of 8. Simplifying the square root of 64 to get 8. I then still have to go through the process of simplifying the square root of 8 right here. The square root of 8 is 4 times 2, which is then 2 times the square root of 2. That 2 is multiplied times that negative 8. 16 minus 16 times the square root of 2 plus 8. Combining the 16 and the 8 gets the same exact answer as I did previously. 24 minus 16 times the square root of 2.